Hello and welcome to another edition of Anomalies, the program about things seen out of the corner of one's eyes, about that which lurks in the shadows, a program about the topics that are sometimes unbelievable and unexplainable. I'm Dan Hall, the Olympia Paranormal Research Group, and I'm glad to be back with my broadcast partner here, Dave Jinks. Dave, how are you doing tonight?
I'm doing well, Dan. Thank you.
Yeah, it's good to be back with you. You know, tonight's topic is going to be about a calendar date. The year is 2012. The calendar date is somewhere around December 21st. Tonight we're going to be talking about the 2012 phenomena, whatever that means, whatever's going to happen in 2012. And we just thought that would be an interesting topic for a podcast. So Dave, what are you doing to get ready for 2012? Is that any special? Tell us about the significance it has for you.
Good question. I'm trying to figure out what to do, how to prepare. Because you hear so many different interpretations of what we're referring to, of course, is the Mayan calendar. 2012 marking the end of a great cycle, or an era, or the fifth world. I believe there's some debate over whether it's the fifth world or the sixth. Are we starting the fifth or the sixth? I don't know. It's very complicated. The Mayans had something like 17 interrelated calendars going at the same time, so it's hard to interpret what they meant when it was created thousands of years ago, literally thousands of years. And I think tonight what our goal should be is to cut through some of the hype and see what we know for sure and make a conclusion about what we think may happen, if anything. So my preparation is to get educated and try to rule out some things and go from there. How about you? Are you
that's
stocked up on?
That's kind of what I'd like to do.
Food and water.
I'd kind of like to start with talking about the possibilities that we've all heard about, some of which might be pretty believable and some might be pretty unbelievable. And then maybe after we've talked a little bit about that, to kind of sort through the truth, however strange that might be. I asked you the question about what are you doing to prepare yourself for this 2012 event, if there is going to be an event in December. And I'm kind of going back and forth about this because I've been to a group. The group is called the Gnostics Group, and it used to meet every about once a month, I guess, on a Sunday. And this Gnostics group was led by a lady who you probably have to say that she was some kind of psychic or had some kind of intuitive abilities. And one of the things that she would talk about in these Gnostic meetings was the idea that if we're living here in Western Washington, by December of this year, 2012 now, we better get the hell out of here. Because her perspective was that, and it almost sounds like those old stories about the San Andreas Fault, the western coast of the United States was going to fall into the ocean. And the only safe seafront property would be in Bozeman, Montana. So I would listen to things like that, and I think this lady really believed that, and I guess that's the apocalypse type of explanation for 2012. So there's part of me that wants to clue into that, but there's another side to me that's maybe more rational, saying maybe this is just a date on the Mayan calendar, and there's not going to be an apocalypse or a consciousness-raising event, which what some other people are talking about. So I guess that's where the difficulty comes between sorting through all these different possibilities.
Well, yeah, I agree. It's hard to tell, especially when you have Hollywood. And I never saw the movie 2012. Did you see that?
I did see it. Yeah.
I assume from the commercials that it was a total apocalypse. Now, did they work in any of the shift of consciousness angle into that, or was it just a pure destruction, doom and gloom, end times movie?
Yeah, I think that's the best. I only saw it once, and I'm trying to remember all the different aspects of the movie, but most of what I remember is like giant tsunami-like tidal waves
Right.
going all the way up into the Himalayas to destroy, civilizations there. Giant earth faults opening, sucking people down into them.
Right.
If there was any consciousness raising going on in that movie, I think it was lost in the destruction of the special effects.
Well, it's interesting because the Earth does show a history, a geological history that included some of those massive apocalyptic catastrophe situations. I think, somewhere around 12,000 years ago, there's all sorts of evidence showing that we went through something almost probably not that severe, with oceans rising to the Himalayas, but certainly destructive, city destroying catastrophes have occurred. And if you're talking about, if you include asteroid strikes and things like that, you obviously can, you have to admit that sort of thing has happened on Earth before. So the question is whether the Mayans knew something, or other civilizations of that era who created these calendars, because as I understand, the Hindus also had a calendar that indicated the end of a great cycle at roughly the same time as the Mayans. So you have to wonder, how did the peoples in the Near East or Asia, how would they know the same, or come to the same conclusions, at least, that the Mayans in Central America would have?
So is it a synchronicity, or just kind of a connected occurrence in some respects?
Well, I think there's a good case to be made that there's a group or a sort of a memory, possibly not a conscious memory, but something that just has kind of become embedded in the culture of peoples over the millennia of time, a shared memory of times when our ancestors did have to deal with massive catastrophes like that. And possibly there were survivors who lived to tell the tale, and there were the wise people, the enlightened people, or maybe the scientists of the day. They decided it was a good idea to memorialize these cyclical, if they are cyclical, events as a warning to future generations. And so you really get into the idea of, were there prior advanced civilizations who were affected and disappeared, or were effectively wiped out because of these great events? And is that what the Mayan calendar is trying to tell us? That we better look out, because these things happen in cycles.
Yeah, I don't think there's any doubt about cycles of events, and maybe events that are kind of catastrophic. The thing that intrigues me, and maybe this is just my sociology background a little bit, is the cultural tie-in. The term, I want to make sure I pronounce this right, eschatological, the study of end-time events. I mean, that seems to be, you're talking about the Hindus and their perspective on cycles, and other civilizations' perspectives on cycles. There seems to be a common human theme that comes out in culture about this notion of the end times. And certainly from a Christian standpoint, you hear about the rapture, the second coming of Christ, but other religious traditions and other cultural traditions have these end time events displayed just in different ways. So to some degree, you kind of wonder, well, is the Mayan calendar really a predictive type of instrument to talk about a shift in consciousness or some kind of destructive event, or is this just our different cultures taking something that's pretty benign and pretty ordinary in some respects, a calendar, and saying, well, we're going to attach some really pretty significant, interesting significance to this, because maybe we're not sure what's going to happen. So I don't know. What do you think about that? This cultural aspect, that different cultures tend to be kind of caught up in what's going to happen in the future, and whether or not there's going to be some kind of end time, and maybe that's just the template that gets put on this calendar. That's one of the calendars that's developed by the Mayan civilization.
Yeah, of course, that's a question for the ages, and it brings into the discussion the whole idea about religion and what's the basis of religion, the whole rapture thing. You know, I think it's safe to say that every religion has a version of the end times, or at least or culmination of an era, which usually involves a deity of some kind coming back to Earth, or calling humans up to heaven, or wherever it is we move into a different realm, or at least consciousness, like you said. And that's the hard part, of separating between, are we talking geological events, or are we talking religious or spiritual events, and if there are one or the other, are they connected in some way? And I think what sets apart the Mayan 2012 phenomenon from, say, just the year 2000, and I'm not talking about Y2K with the computer issue, I'm talking about just the millennial madness, which
right.
occurs around that number 2000, or I presume at 1000. What I think sets the Mayan calendar apart from that is that they specifically said it's the end of a cycle of consciousness or spirituality, and there were several different cycles. I think, again, like I said, I think it's the fifth world, that we're entering into, whereas with our calendar, the year 2000, there was not specifically any prediction by the creators of that particular calendar, the Gregorian calendar, that we use. There wasn't any specific prediction of a deity returning, at least not that I know of, or a movement into a different world just because of that number. But that didn't mean that a lot of people didn't see that number as significant and reason to freak out, basically, in a lot of cases.
Yeah, I think it's kind of hard just to view a calendar as a date. The tendency maybe for humanity is to attach certain significances to certain dates. And then, as we were referring to a little bit ago, these end times type of thing. So you have people predicting that there prophecy, and I think that's what we're talking about, some kind of prophecy, essentially, maybe kind of like the Nostradamus prophecies, maybe like Edgar Cayce prophecies. Yeah, people are predicting that certain events are going to occur, and I don't remember what the name of that church was, just recently, where the pastor claimed that the end of the world was going to come, and then inevitably what happens is we're still here on that date, and then the pastor has to kind of reformulate or come up with some kind of excuse why things didn't happen as he said they would. To me, the difficulty with that is that once you start delving into the spiritual or metaphysical importance of a certain date, there's always going to be some kind of evidence to show that that's not true, that if you're going to try to predict something, the predictions don't come true. And then to me, you start questioning the whole purpose of, hey, maybe it is just a date type of thing.
And something that we discussed before we started the interview was the whole Y2K, the computer bug, the millennium bug, as it was called. And you mentioned that there wasn't the big, obvious apocalyptic change that was portrayed in, media everywhere, across the board. Movies were made about it, and TV shows, and I remember even a Simpsons show that had airplanes falling out of the sky, and outlets malfunctioning and burning everything, burning cities down and whatever. But that it didn't happen in an apocalyptic way, but as I pointed out again when we were having this discussion, that companies did spend hundreds of millions and possibly billions of dollars to avoid that problem. And so it was a significant problem. It was just that it was dealt with before it became an apocalypse. And again, I don't think there was any realistic scenario where we would have had airplanes falling out of the sky. But the point is that you can have an apocalyptic change, or you can have a real transition change that is not so dramatic. And I think probably what's going to happen with December of 2012, this year, amazingly. When I think about it, it's
not just a date of the future.
Yeah, it's
coming pretty
several
close.
months away. When I think about that, my belief is that there will be a change, and I don't believe, although I do include it as a possibility, I don't believe that there will be an apocalyptic event, a single event. I think it will be more of a consciousness-based change, a shift, for lack of a better term, and I think that shift has been occurring for a number of decades already. And the reason I believe this is that, again, the Mayans, if they had anything to say about the end of this world, this theoretical, this metaphorical world, they said that it would be a consciousness shift or a shift in spirituality. And that's what they said. They never said anywhere that the world is going to end and that the oceans will overtake the mountains or anything like that. I've never seen any account attributed to the Mayans that was anywhere near that description. So I guess we could talk about what spiritual change might happen in that scenario. Now, the other thing I'll say, though, as a caveat to that, I guess, is that there is a possibility of a major geological event, and the reason I believe that is that the Egyptians had a similar timeline that appeared to go on at like a 25,000 year cycle, 20-some thousand year cycle. The Mayan cycle is about 25 or 26,000 years, and the Hindu, I believe, that we've referred to earlier, it ended roughly the same as the Mayans. I don't know what their time period was, but so the idea that there exist these very unreasonably advanced, when you look at it, these civilizations thousands of years ago, with these very complicated calendars and time frames and specific monuments dedicated to memorializing these particular time frames, I cannot discount the possibility that they knew something. And what I believe is that it's based on possibly astronomical phenomena, as well as potential Earth cycles, earthquakes, or some of the other Hollywood type apocalyptic visions. It's certainly not impossible when you consider the great lengths that these ancient civilizations went to memorialize with gigantic stone markers, which even today we really don't know how they created such an extensive array of these markers, which are obviously astronomical markers. And so that makes me think that there could be, and probably the best candidate for what could generate an apocalyptic scenario is, of course, asteroids, or basically meteor storms or clouds created or left over from comets or asteroids that have been near Earth or possibly hit Earth in the past. So what if these civilizations had ancestors who were either clobbered by some of these streams of debris left over from comets and other things flying around in the solar system? What if they were clobbered and really needed to make a note to future humanity, you better watch out for this? Or there was some other geophysical phenomena that they know occurs in patterns. That's a possibility that we have to obviously think of. And again, that does fall more into the Hollywood sensationalistic apocalypse scenario.
Well, one of the things to me that argues against that is the specificity of a date, December 21st or 23rd of 2012. Because when I hear you talk about some of these possible Earth realignments or spatial changes or Earth changes, it seems to me that's a whole process that is gone through. For instance, a polar shift, one of the explanations that could be tied into maybe the apocalyptic side of what could happen to 2012 is the polar shift that could be occurring, the magnetic shift in magnetic poles on the Earth. But if you read about that process, that's something that is kind of a gradual, well, it is a process. It's not just something that happens on one date. Maybe even with the asteroids striking Earth and creating an apocalyptic event like that, it would seem to be very hard to predict the exact date and time that would happen. I know that there was some talk about realignment of the galactic plane as an explanation for 2012. Almost like, and it was several years back when there was some kind of alignment within the solar system that became known as the harmonic convergence. And I think that was another kind of an event that people were going to look at and say, well, this might be the beginning of a new way for humanity to relate to each other. But once again, those kinds of processes, whether they be spatial or involve time, it seems to be difficult to reduce that to a single date where an event might happen, because just the predictability of that seems suspect. So I guess it's not to diminish the fact that other civilizations may have seen patterns that were involved in changes, but to me, it's not a very persuasive argument to say that some of these, the precession of the sun across the sky and how it aligns with the Milky Way is going to be such so that on December 12th or December 21st of 2012, we're going to have this great sea change or some kind of apocalyptic event. That just doesn't seem logical to me. That doesn't mean it's not going to happen, but that's just a question of the logic of that.
Well, yeah, that's a good point. I think that there's one thing that we can track with pretty good accuracy is the orbits of asteroids, and we can predict, with really good accuracy the various meteor storms that occur throughout the year. Certain ones occur in certain months, and they come from certain constellations, and so we know when we pass through these clouds, and if the Mayans and possibly other civilizations knew, because they obviously had very advanced astronomical knowledge somehow. However they developed it or whether they inherited that knowledge is kind of, it's really a subject of pretty intense debate, actually.
Because isn't one of the arguments here is that you're really not dealing with the Mayan calendar. You're dealing with a calendar developed by an earlier civilization called the Olmecs that people don't really know a whole lot about. So we don't even know if this is the Mayan prophecy. It could be the Olmec prophecy.
Yeah, in fact, the Olmecs, as far as I understand, and I wish I had the quote exactly with me, I think it's in my book, they basically appeared fully formed, was the quote from a PhD archaeologist or somebody who studies the very, very ancient civilizations, and when you really look at the body of evidence, it strongly suggests that there was a higher civilization that gradually descended into more chaotic, lesser civilization or less advanced civilizations as they tried to pick up the pieces of the older civilization and reestablish a civilization with, that trended eventually upward into the scientific, which is where we are, or at least that's the way we like to think about it. There have been peaks and valleys, of course, but the Olmec civilization appeared to be fully formed almost out of nowhere. There's nothing before them to show why they would be that advanced, and the similar situation occurs in the most ancient of civilizations that we have studied, and that, going back to Sumeria before the Egyptians and the Akkadians and those civilizations that we know very little about, but they had very extensive, again, calendars, astronomical experience. The Dogon, you may have heard that with their anomalous understanding of the Sirius triple star system now. We used to think it was binary, only 2 stars. Well, we used to think it was 1, and we realized it was 2, like the Dogon apparently had indicated in their very ancient drawings, and now I believe it's a triple star system. So it's a given, I think, if you look at the totality of the evidence, that there were more civilizations more advanced than they should have been in our linear view of time as going from primitive to increasingly more sophistication.
Well, now,
and they certainly would have known if, and I believe they did exist, if this extensive astronomical knowledge existed, they would have known and been able to calculate the orbits of various asteroids, comets, and their debris fields. And we are routinely finding, having near misses. I think we had one a couple weeks ago of giant rocks that appear out of the shadows of the Earth and the geometry of the sun and different planets, whatever. Jupiter flings stuff through the solar system all the time. So certainly there are a lot of rocks flying around out there, and I think it's plausible that the Mayans could have tracked and known about a particularly dangerous one that may be set to revisit us at some point.
Well, that's where I want to go back to the Olmecs for a minute, particularly when you talked about the guy who studied the civilization and said that they appeared to be fully formed. It's almost like they were an advanced civilization that came from outer space. I was almost thinking there was an extra planetary kind of connection to that. And what was interesting to me about that is that one of the other theories about the cyclical nature of the Mayan calendar and what might happen in 2012 is a subject that we've heard discussed on one of our favorite shows, Coast to Coast AM, Planet X or Nibiru, the Zacharias Sitchin concept that life possibly didn't civilizations such as we know them didn't originate here on Earth. They originated with this Planet X, or that he referred to as Nibiru, I believe, and that this planet revisited this area of space at various different cycles, and that somehow the Earth and humanity on Earth is kind of a seeded population from this Planet X. But yet, even though supposedly Zacharias Sitchin did some exhaustive research in that area, I don't think anybody's ever that sounds like a pretty far-fetched idea. Has anybody ever proved that there's a Planet X and that it comes back periodically, and that I don't know, that seems to be just Sitchin had a lot of credibility within his field, but I don't know that idea has ever been proved. Do you?
No, I think it was supposed to have an orbital period of 3,600 years, something like that, with Sitchin. And I know there's a lot of astronomers have discovered a lot of things flying around out there, and just beyond the solar system too. There has been an unexpected number of larger bodies that have various names that are really hard to pronounce. I can't remember. Quaoar, I think, is one, and there are a couple others that potentially could be categorized as Planet X, the 10th planet. Now, of course, we demoted Pluto,
right? So
it'd
be the 9th planet. Yeah.
But none of them appearing in that sort of orbit, 3,600-year orbit. There's nothing that I know of that has ever come close to fitting that characteristic of supposed planet. The other thing with that is that I don't know why that planet would have any effect necessarily on the Earth in terms of cataclysms or the whole seeding of a spacefaring civilization jumping from planet to planet or whatever. That's a whole other ball game to me. But as far as creating the situation for predictable regular cataclysm on Earth, I don't know how that would fit in, the whole Planet X.
Which leads me to believe this idea of cataclysm might be more a cultural icon than anything else. And what reminds me of this, as I was preparing for the show, I was reading about a couple of kind of media things that have gone on lately that have just emphasized that if 2012 means anything, it means something negative. And one of those things was evidently, and I didn't watch it, but the Super Bowl this year featured an ad where some people were driving along in a Chevy Silverado, I believe, in some kind of apocalyptic scenario where the world had been destroyed. So the connection was, hey, something bad is going to happen in 2012, and you better be in a Chevy Silverado rather than a Ford Focus if you want to survive. And then in a related conversation with a friend about 2012, she said, I think it's on the History Channel, that there's a show called Doomsday Preppers, and this is supposedly a very popular, one of the highest rated shows on the network, where they essentially talk about how to prepare for Armageddon. So those, I'm just wondering that maybe as we focus on 2012 and we think about these astronomical events that could be, asteroids or things similar to what destroyed the dinosaurs, impacts by the Earth that produced some kind of extinction level event. Maybe that's just our culture talking about its fascination with end times and what happens. And maybe that's a reason to focus, if there is going to be some kind of change, maybe that change is going to be a positive change. The other side of this coin, which is the paradigm shift, where human consciousness is going to be raised in some way. You think that's a more likely explanation, or is it just as probable as the doom and gloom?
Yeah, I'm kind of on the fence as far as that goes, because, and I keep going back to you can't understate the fact that the Mayans were very advanced astronomically. They were obsessed, as were the Egyptians. They were obsessed with keeping track of the stuff and the stuff flying around in the sky. And there's so many cultures that went to such great lengths to, again, memorialize by moving 20, 40, 200-ton blocks of stone in feats that would be very difficult or even impossible today. Some, 200 tons, I think, in Egypt, or the areas of the pyramids, and again in Central America. It just seems like such effort in a time when presumably it was hard enough to find food to eat, and to battle the elements. And I don't know what the average life expectancy was, but if you only lived to your mid-30s or something, why are you spending so much time moving rocks? It's completely unnecessary.
Unless there's a catastrophe coming.
Well,
unless there's some kind of event you have to plan for.
An overwhelmingly important, basically selfless task that you have to accomplish in order to basically keep your civilization alive, or your future human beings from becoming extinct. That's the only alternative to that is, of course, the mainstream view that it was just to please the gods and to please the human kings and pharaohs and leaders of the day. That's what's been argued, but when you look at just for an example, I really recommend Christopher Dunn's book. Dunn is an engineer with some 50 years experience, and his experience is in the aeronautical field, so rocket science, literally. And he's got what is it called? It is Lost Technologies of Ancient Egypt. So we're talking about Egypt here, not necessarily Central America and the Mayan civilization. But for example, Dunn has done hundreds, maybe thousands of measurements of certain artifacts and other engineering architectural things in Egypt and elsewhere. And as just one example here, he was fascinated with the fact that the stones, some of the stones in Egypt were so flat, they were just almost perfectly flat, which is completely unnecessary engineering-wise. There's no reason you'd need something perfectly flat. He did a measurement and discovered on one of these stones that the perfect plane, it was almost perfect, achieved perfectly flat. He said with the sweep of a measurement device in a 16-inch diameter circle, he found that the flatness was consistent to the width of 1/5 the thickness of a human hair. So it was like 1/2 of 1,000th of an inch.
Wow.
Something ridiculously. And by comparison, when he went back to the hotel he was staying in, there was a modern manufactured glass table, and he used the same instrument on that table, and he found that the error was 1,400% larger on that manufactured glass table. So we're talking things that are just mind-numbingly accurate for no apparent reason. I mean, even if the pharaoh was going to cut your head off if you didn't get it, to his mind, perfectly flat, there would be no way for the pharaoh to know that you were 1/5 of a human hair in close to perfection, or if you were 7/1000ths of an inch like the glass table. Those things just don't matter unless it's easy to do, for one thing. That's kind of the assumption you have to make, is that it was easy for them to do things almost perfectly. They had some sort of process, some sort of machinery that made it possible to do that without a whole lot of trouble. Because just having to sit down and sand it with some other material to get it that perfect, it just is implausible that you could do that with any of the tools that were supposedly available that long ago. So when I look at things like that, and again, you really have to look at the entire books documenting all the various anomalies and this sort of ridiculous level of perfection that was achieved in these amazing pieces of work. You are forced to conclude that they really were that advanced, and you are therefore forced to accept that there's a reason for these calendars being so precise. It's not just to please the god or to please the pharaoh or whatever. It's an engineering and scientific mind that created these things. And engineers and scientists don't do things out of religious motivation. Typically, they do it because, in this case, I think they wanted someone to really pay attention to the degree of perfection that went into some of these engineering miracles. Is basically what it is. And a lot of scientists would include the Mayan calendar as far as the way it was so accurate. They would include that in the category of miracle, I believe, or at least very unnecessarily precise. And so that's what keeps me on the, slightly on the side of there may be an astronomical reason for this, and therefore I have to look at 2012, December 21st or thereabouts, as a date that might be specific for a reason.
I guess maybe my role in our program tonight is to be that of the skeptic, which is unusual for me.
Right.
But as I hear you talk about, what was the author's name that was talking about the technology of other civilizations?
Christopher Dunn.
Okay. Another author I would throw out there that reminds me of Christopher Dunn on some level is Erich von Däniken, who I'm sure you've heard of, who wrote that book, Chariot of the Gods. Now, it seems to me in that book, he did some, not the same, but similar kinds of things. He looked at certain, and I'm thinking of like the plains of Nazca, which I think is in Peru, which has these unusual, I don't know what you'd call them, almost furrows or valleys that go through the plains, and that's all they look at or look like as the eye looks over the plains of Nazca. But once someone goes above the earth in some kind of conveyance, whether that be a hot air balloon or plane or whatever, you look down and you see that these things aren't just valleys, furrows and valleys, that they're actually figures. I think there's figures like spiders and other kinds of figures that you can only see once you're airborne. So some of those kind of things were very persuasive when von Däniken's book came out, but if you listen to people today talk about Erich von Däniken, they're pretty dismissive of his ideas almost from the standpoint of, I guess I would use the term, if you're familiar with the Rorschach test in psychology, where they give you some kind of ink blot essentially and say, what does this mean to you? Well, looks like a spider figure from the air, to use the planes in Nazca as example. So I guess I'm wondering, there's a skepticism about those interpretation of certain technology and certain events and certain places that on one level looks like it might be indicative of something deeper, but on another level might just be a good story to sell a certain kind of a book like Chariots of the Gods.
Right.
And that doesn't mean that what your author was talking about, or for that matter, I'm sure there are people that still believe in Eric von Däniken, the research he's done. I think he's still out there in the media giving talks, and I hear him, even have heard him on Coast to Coast. So I guess you can't totally dismiss that, but
is von Däniken, is he's like an ancient astronaut theoretician,
right,
basically, like Sitchin or Velikovsky, I think, was another that subscribed to the theory that we've had ancient astronauts. Somebody else who subscribed to that theory was Carl Sagan, who a lot of people put in the category diametrically opposed to people
huge
like
skeptic,
Velikovsky and
right,
von Däniken and Sitchin. But Sagan wrote in his book with Shklovsky, the Russian scientist, he said that it's likely that the Earth has been visited by spacefaring civilizations every 10,000 years. That was Sagan, saying that it was, sure, we're visited every so often. And so whether we bring ancient astronauts into the whole thing, I mean, that's a whole other ball of wax, a whole Pandora's box that maybe we shouldn't open. But I might argue, as far as the Nazca lines, that those are astronomically oriented too, and I've seen some very intriguing work connecting those with the Egyptian, the Great Pyramid, the shaft of the Great Pyramids, or shafts exiting the pyramid, are would be focused on certain stars in a particular era, and so on. So you can, that again brings up the idea of a global effort to really point to the stars and say, look here, people, in the future, we've given you this message, and we've put 40-ton stones up, erected them to survive every earthquake and flood that Mother Nature can throw at you, so that you get the picture when it's time. And I think we're just now starting to, and there's no controversy on a lot of it. A lot of people, like you were saying, you can say, well, you can connect any direction to any particular star depending on the era, and because things are always moving. But there's no doubt that places like Stonehenge, there was just another Stonehenge type, stoneworks discovered in, now I forget where it was, but it was just like literally within the last couple of weeks. I saw a really interesting article about another Stonehenge somewhere. So people all over the planet were very obsessed with setting up markers that marked the solstice, and kept track of lunar cycles, and Venus was very important to most ancient civilizations too. So again, was it to please the gods, or was it to give a message to the future regarding some specific important event? I don't know, but I think that 2012 for the Mayans certainly was to indicate a significant event, whether it's astronomical or not. But the other alternative, like you mentioned, is a shift in basically an evolution of human consciousness. Which
let's talk about that. And our time is winding down here, but I think that's an important topic to end our discussion with. So what do you if that is the net effect of 2012, a shift in consciousness, what do you hope that looks like?
Well, I guess I do, even though I've talked a lot about things hitting Earth and rock
doom and
flying
gloom
through space, apocalyptic changes and all that, I would probably actually fall on that side of it being a shift in consciousness, and I think that because the Mayans specifically said that in that it was basically a period of enlightenment where the bad qualities of humanity would generally fall by the wayside, and we would all come together in one big kumbaya moment, which of course takes us firmly into the New Age airy-fairy realm.
One world order too, realm.
Yeah, but I believe that it's and again, my main source on this, my knowledge on this is Jose Arguelles, I think is how you say. The Mayan Factor is his book, and he goes really in detail about the spiritual aspect. But I believe he's right, and the Mayans said that it's not one big climax. It's the beginning of a new cycle, and it will continue for years. And my personal belief, and I guess I don't have specific data to back it up, is that humans will start to realize and feel and understand the connection to others and to the rest of nature, I suppose, and I think we will, at least the opportunity will be there for those of us who want to move that way. I think it'll be an accelerated period where we will have that choice, but there will be lots of people who resist it, and that could lead to a lot of chaos too, because it's right at the cusp of, again, what the Mayan says, the cusp of one world moving into another. There's always chaos and friction at the intersection of two entities or two eras. So what I would predict here on this show is that we will have, over the next several months, 6 months from now, 7, 8, I guess, that we will start having some really significant changes in like experiments that scientists do. We'll start getting some pretty bizarre results that show that there's a lot mind-matter interaction going on at a level that we've never seen before. And I think psychic connections or activity may increase, that we'll have more and more people just going, whoa, I knew that was going to happen, or
yeah.
I get it, or I feel a connection. And at the same time, there's always got to be that other side resisting it. I think we'll see the continuance of, the opposite of that, disconnection from other people. We'll probably see more and more warring and violence and the unfortunate dark side of the spiritual enlightenment. And I guess people have been saying that for years and centuries. That we're spiritually evolving and whatever, but I think this will be a very noticeable, and I said scientifically notable change in the human species. Personally, that's what I believe, and that's based on Jose Arguelles' work and what the Mayans said specifically.
Well, it's certainly a much more hopeful and positive outlook.
Mm-hmm.
Even if that's not what's going to happen, even if it's some kind of global catastrophe, I would think that might spur people to change their way of thinking. If something terrible does happen on a planetary basis, if we're reduced to riding through some kind of post-calamitous world in a Chevy, automobile, maybe an event like that would cause people to reorient their priorities, reorient what's important to them. I think it's important to talk about events like this, regardless of what happens in December of 2012. People are going to be talking about it. People are going to be wondering about it. It's going to be given importance. Maybe above and beyond the importance it deserves as just a date on the Mayan calendar. So I think it's important to be talking about these issues and how people might react to them and how they might face them.
Well, I think it's important to know what your predictions are, Dan, because I went out on a limb and
okay.
What is your feeling for what might happen? I can tell you're sort of somewhere in between, and you're sort of on the I don't think anything's going to happen. It's the Y2K all over again.
Well, I am like that, but I guess the comment I just made is the hopeful comment that because there's a certain degree of we don't know what's going to happen. There's a certain unknown quality about it. That this is an opportunity to remake things in a better way if we choose to do that. So just by the fact that we think something's going to happen, whether it does or not, by thinking about that and talking about that, we can make certain things happen. Mm-hmm. And the world today, as you look at it, is obviously fraught with all kinds of danger, all kinds of questions about the sustainability of the planet and the survival of humanity. So I think talking about what could be a sea change in the way people approach their lives and the lives of the collective is a good thing, regardless of what the significance of the 2012 date is, because you need to have those discussions. And so I guess my hope, I'm kind of wishy-washy here about making a prediction, but my hope would be that would spur a whole new conversation about humanity's purpose on this planet, how we need to be reconnected to the planet, how we need to think and act on our own sustainability. So whether or not that's going to happen or not, that would be the hope. Call that a prediction, I guess. I guess we'll have to wait till December 21st, around the winter solstice. We'll have to get together and have a beer and see if we're all still here, and if anything has changed that time. I guess that's the only, for sure.
That would be a brilliant way to mark a new world coming, is to put it on the calendar that something's going to change, and by virtue of having it be the marker, the end point, people do make the change. I hadn't thought of it that way that you've just described it, is that maybe it is nothing, but the fact that we've now acknowledged it and focused on it may end up being something significant.
And I think just as you could do that in a negative way by concentrating on the fact that there might be some kind of gigantic calamity that would come out of all this, you could do so in a positive way too. You could kind of map out the new human paradigm, how we need to think in a different way, and think about all of us rather than some of us. So that's my hope.
I think you're right. I think it'll be a battle between, which way are we going? You know, we're at a crossroads again. It's the beginning of the new world, and which side will win? You know, will it be the side that's the downside of being a human, or will it be the uplifting spiritual side? Now, I hate to say that history is not really on our side, you know, as far as the positive uplifting, but it may indeed be a new world, and we may make that leap, you know, across that dividing line, and there will be enough of us who do take us in the direction that the Mayans said that we would go. So yeah, it's not long now. We'll certainly find out.
And if there was a good thing to having multiple calendars the Mayans worked on, it seemed to me I was reading about one version of one calendar that they had that prognosticated a date of some 4000 AD. So someone in the Mayan culture was thinking there's going to be a future. Maybe that's a good sign for us. We can think along those same lines.
Yeah.
All right, Dave, thanks a lot for the conversation. Enjoyed talking about 2012, and we'll be back again sometime with another podcast.
Okay, thank you, Dan.
Bye.
It's the end of the world.